For generations, mothers reached for the same bottle, the soft white powder, the familiar scent. Johnson's baby powder sat in nurseries across America, a symbol of purity, of safety, of trust. Then came the lawsuits, tens of thousands of them. Women who had used the powder for decades claimed it had made them sick. They claimed the company knew. And as internal documents emerged in courtroom after courtroom, juries began awarding staggering sums in damages. How did this happen? How did a company built on the promise of sterile medicine, of protecting the vulnerable, become the defendant in one of the largest product liability cases in American history? The answer begins not in a courtroom, but on a battlefield. It begins with blood, infection, and three brothers who believed they could save lives. This is Johnson & Johnson, the empire built on trust, the dynasty haunted by tragedy, the family name that became synonymous with healing and then with something far darker. Chapter 1: Three Brothers and a Medical Revolution. The summer of 1876 was unbearably hot in Philadelphia. 10 million Americans descended on the city for the Centennial Exposition, the nation's 100th birthday celebration. They came to see Alexander Graham Bell demonstrate his telephone. They marveled at the coreless steam engine, the largest in the world. They tasted new inventions called popcorn and soda water. But one man had come for something else entirely. Robert Wood Johnson was 31 years old, a pharmaceutical wholesaler from New York who already had a decade of experience in the medical supply business. He was not in Philadelphia to gawk at machines or taste novelties. He had registered for the International Medical Congress, the largest gathering of physicians in American history. And on one particular afternoon, he sat in a lecture hall and listened to a soft-spoken British surgeon deliver a 3-hour presentation that would change his life. The surgeon was Joseph Lister. His subject was antiseptic surgery. His audience was skeptical, even hostile. To understand why, you have to understand what surgery meant in 1876. It meant death. Not sometimes, not occasionally, routinely. The Civil War had ended just 11 years earlier, and the horrors of battlefield medicine remained fresh in the American memory. Of the roughly 620,000 soldiers who died in that conflict, 2/3 perished not from bullets or bayonets, but from disease and infection. Surgeons operated in blood-stained coats, using instruments they cleaned only with cold water. They probed wounds with unwashed fingers. They used the same sponge on patient after patient, rinsing it briefly between operations. The concept of invisible organisms causing disease seemed absurd to most physicians. If you could not see it, how could it harm you? The results were catastrophic. Pyemia, literally pus in the blood, killed over 90% of those who contracted it. Tetanus claimed 87%. Gangrene spread through hospital wards like wildfire. A simple wound survived on the battlefield could become a death sentence in the recovery tent. Lister had an explanation, he had an answer, he had proof. Building on the work of Louis Pasteur, who had demonstrated that microorganisms caused fermentation and decay, Lister had developed techniques for preventing infection during surgery. Sterilize the instruments. Clean the hands. Apply antiseptic dressings soaked in carbolic acid. The results were remarkable. Mortality rates in his operating theater plummeted. But the American medical establishment wanted nothing to do with it. The physicians in Philadelphia that day, many of them distinguished veterans, had specifically invited Lister with the intention of discrediting him publicly. They interrupted his lecture with objections. They dismissed his evidence. They called his methods impractical, cumbersome, unnecessary. Robert Wood Johnson saw something different. He had 2 older brothers who had served in the Union Army. He knew the stories. He had spent years working in the pharmaceutical trade, watching patients die from infections that should not have killed them. As Lister spoke, Johnson did not hear impractical theories. He heard opportunity. He heard a way to save lives on a massive scale. It would take another decade before he could act on that vision. In 1874, Johnson had partnered with George Seabury to form Seabury & Johnson, a successful manufacturer of medicated plasters. The partnership thrived, but the two men disagreed about direction. Johnson wanted to pursue antiseptic products aggressively. Seabury was more cautious. By late 1885, the partnership dissolved. Johnson had a vision but no company. His younger brother James had a solution. In January of 1886, James Wood Johnson boarded a train from New York heading toward Philadelphia. Somewhere in central New Jersey, the locomotive slowed through a small industrial city called New Brunswick. James looked out the window and saw a brick building with a sign that read, "For rent." He got off at the next station and walked back. The building was a former wallpaper factory on the banks of the Raritan River. New Brunswick sat exactly halfway between New York and Philadelphia, connected to both by rail and canal. It was perfect. James contacted his brothers. Robert brought the vision and the experience. Edward Meade Johnson, the youngest, brought business acumen and marketing instincts. On March 25, 1886, the company wrote its first check. The familiar logo, that distinctive script reading Johnson & Johnson, was based on James Wood Johnson's own handwriting. They started with 14 employees, 8 women and 6 men, most recruited from Seabury & Johnson. Their product line was simple but revolutionary. Ready-to-use sterile surgical dressings, sealed in individual packages to prevent contamination. For the first time, any surgeon anywhere could perform antiseptic surgery without preparing the materials themselves. The medical establishment remained skeptical, so the brothers did something remarkable. In 1888, they published a book called Modern Methods of Antiseptic Wound Treatment. It was a comprehensive manual on sterile surgical technique, written by leading practitioners, explaining exactly how to perform surgery safely using Johnson & Johnson products. They printed 85,000 copies and gave them away free to physicians across the country. It was advertising disguised as education. It was marketing in the service of medicine, and it worked. By 1894, 8 years after that first check, Johnson & Johnson employed over 400 people across 14 buildings. They had introduced maternity kits and the first commercial first aid kits. Robert Wood Johnson served as president, driving the company toward his vision of accessible, affordable, sterile healthcare products for everyone. The foundation was laid, the empire was rising. The brothers had built something that would outlast them all. What they could not know was how their descendants would use that inheritance, or squander it, or betray everything the name had come to mean. Chapter 2: The General and the Band-Aid. Josephine Dixon kept cutting herself in the kitchen. Every evening in their modest home in Highland Park, New Jersey, she prepared dinner for her husband Earl. And every evening, something went wrong. A slip of the knife, a burn from a hot pan, a nick from a grater. Her fingers were perpetually bandaged. Earl Dixon worked as a cotton buyer for Johnson & Johnson, just across the Raritan River in New Brunswick. Each time Josephine injured herself, he would cut a piece of sterile gauze, cut a strip of adhesive tape, and fashion a makeshift bandage. The bandages fell off her active fingers within hours. By 1920, Earl had had enough. One evening, he sat down at the kitchen table with a roll of surgical tape and a strip of gauze. He laid the gauze in a narrow pad down the center of the tape, covered it with crinoline to keep the adhesive from sticking to itself, and rolled the whole thing back up. Now Josephine could simply unroll the tape, cut off what she needed, and apply the bandage herself. He mentioned it to his supervisor, who mentioned it to James Wood Johnson, one of the company's founders. James recognized the potential immediately. Johnson & Johnson began producing the bandages commercially in 1921. They called them Band-Aids. The first year was a disaster. Total sales, $3,000. The bandages were 18 inches long, designed to be cut to size. Consumers did not understand how to use them. The company persisted. They made the bandages smaller. They improved the packaging. And then someone had a brilliant idea. Give them away free to Boy Scout troops across the country. Suddenly, every camping trip in America featured boys coming home with Band-Aids on their scraped knees. Their mothers noticed. They asked where to buy them. By 1924, Johnson & Johnson had installed machines to mass-produce the bandages. By the time Earl Dixon retired as vice president in 1957, Band-Aid had become synonymous with adhesive bandage itself. All because a young bride kept cutting herself in the kitchen. The Band-Aid story captures something essential about Johnson & Johnson in its early decades. Innovation came from paying attention, from seeing a problem and solving it, from treating ordinary people's ordinary needs as worthy of serious attention. That philosophy had a champion within the company. His name was Robert Wood Johnson II, and he would become known simply as the General. Born in 1893, he was the eldest son of the company's founding brother. His father brought him to business meetings, took him to factories, expected him to understand the family enterprise. By 6, young Robert wore a tuxedo to social functions. By 16, he was visiting the New Brunswick facilities regularly. Then, in 1910, his father died from Bright's disease. Robert was 16. He inherited $2 million, a fortune worth nearly $70 million today. His mother urged him to attend college. Robert refused. Instead, he took an entry-level job at the company powerhouse, determined to learn the business from the ground up. He worked alongside laborers. He rotated through departments. By 1915, at 22, he was named a department head. During the First World War, he became General Superintendent of Manufacturing. In 1918, Vice President. In 1932, President. He was 39 years old. Over the next 3 decades, Johnson transformed the family business into a global healthcare corporation. He opened plants in Brazil, Argentina, India. He expanded into pharmaceuticals and medical devices. But his most lasting contribution was not a product or a factory. It was a single page. In 1943, with America deep in the Second World War, Johnson wrote what he called Our Credo. It declared that Johnson & Johnson's first responsibility was to doctors, nurses, patients, and mothers who use their products. Second came the employees. Third, the communities. And last, dead last, came the stockholders. Many business leaders thought it was naive. Johnson believed that if a company took care of customers, employees, and communities, profits would follow naturally. He had earned a new title by then. During the war, he had been commissioned as a brigadier general, placed in charge of the New York Ordnance District. President Roosevelt appointed him vice chairman of the War Production Board. For the rest of his life, everyone called him the General. The General died on January 30th, 1968. He was 74. He left the bulk of his $400 million estate to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. When the will cleared probate, the stock had appreciated to over $1.2 billion. The company was thriving. The credo was guiding decisions. The foundation would spend decades improving American healthcare. But the General had a younger brother. And that brother had been building a very different kind of legacy. Chapter 3. The Dark Brother. The General built an empire. His younger brother destroyed a family. John Seward Johnson was born in 1895, 2 years after Robert. They grew up in the same house, inherited the same fortune, bore the same name. But where Robert threw himself into the family business, Seward drifted. Where Robert wrote manifestos about corporate responsibility, Seward collected wives and secrets. His first marriage was to Ruth Dill, a woman from a prominent Bermuda family. Her sister Diana was an actress, the future mother of Michael Douglas. Seward and Ruth seemed, on paper, like the perfect Gilded Age match. As a wedding gift, Seward built Ruth a mansion. He called it Marywold. The estate in Highland Park, New Jersey, cost $350,000 before the Depression, a staggering sum. It featured secret passages and elaborate zodiac symbols over the fireplace representing Seward, Ruth, and their firstborn daughter. That daughter was Mary Lee Johnson. In 1926, the company put her face on the Johnson's baby powder container. She was a beautiful infant, pink-cheeked and innocent, the perfect symbol of the company's promise to protect the most vulnerable. Her image would sell millions of units. Decades later, during a bitter legal battle, Mary Lee would make a devastating accusation. She alleged that her father had sexually abused her from the age of 9 until she was 15. The claim emerged during her 1977 divorce proceedings and resurfaced during the will contest after Seward's death. Some family members disputed it. Her own sons expressed doubt. But Mary Lee maintained the accusation until her death in 1990. Whether true or false, the allegation exposed the rot beneath the Johnson family's polished surface. Seward and Ruth divorced around 1937. He remarried 2 years later to Esther Underwood. They had 2 more children, Jennifer and James. For 32 years, Esther was his wife. But Seward was not faithful. In 1968, Esther hired a new chambermaid. Her name was Barbara Piasecka. She was Polish, spoke little English, and had arrived in America with $100 in her pocket and a degree in art history. Within a year, Seward had moved her into a Sutton Place apartment he paid for. He gave her a job as his art curator at $12,000 a year. He took her scuba diving. He proposed on her birthday in São Paulo, Brazil, while still married to Esther. In November 1971, 8 days after his divorce became final, Seward married Beijia. He was 76 years old. She was 34. The age gap was 42 years. None of his 6 children attended the wedding. Seward spent his final years at Jasna Polana, a 50,000-square-foot mansion in Princeton that Beijia designed and decorated with old master paintings and Flemish art. He also funded the Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institution in Florida, a legitimate scientific endeavor that stood in strange contrast to his personal chaos. His health declined. He developed cancer. Beijia, by her own account, cared for him devotedly, changing his bandages, following doctors' orders precisely. Others would later testify that she berated him, controlled him, isolated him from his children. On April 14, 1983, Seward signed a new will. It left virtually everything to Beijia. 5 weeks later, on May 23rd, he died. He was 87 years old. His estate was worth over $400 million. His 6 children, already wealthy from family trusts, had been almost entirely cut out. The stage was set for one of the ugliest inheritance battles in American history. But that battle would reveal something more than greed. It would expose generations of dysfunction, abuse, and betrayal hidden behind the Johnson name. The family that sold trust to America had none left among themselves. Chapter 4. The Maid Who Inherited Millions. The trial began in the spring of 1986, nearly 3 years after Seward Johnson's death. It would become one of the longest, costliest, and most vicious inheritance battles in American history. On one side sat Barbara Piasecka Johnson, the widow. On the other, 6 children who claimed their father had been manipulated, coerced, and controlled by a woman who had entered their home as a servant and left it as a billionaire. Over 200 lawyers participated. More than 300,000 pages of documents were submitted as evidence. The trial lasted 17 weeks. When it finally ended, the legal fees exceeded $24 million. The children's case was simple. Their father had been senile when he signed his final will. Beijia had isolated him from his family, berated him in front of staff, and pressured him into leaving her everything. They produced witnesses who described her screaming at the elderly man, controlling his access to visitors, dominating every aspect of his final years. Beijia's defense was equally direct. She had loved her husband. She had cared for him when his own children would not. She had changed his bandages, followed his doctor's orders, stayed by his side through his decline. If he chose to leave her his fortune, that was his right. The courtroom became a theater of family dysfunction. Testimony revealed affairs, addictions, estrangements, accusations of abuse. Every skeleton emerged from every closet. Judge Marie Lambert later said she received threats of physical violence and that it took personal courage to sit through the proceedings. The jurors, paid $12 a day, sat in judgment on people worth hundreds of millions. Among the children fighting for their inheritance was Mary Lee Johnson Richards. Her life since that baby powder photograph had been a cascade of tragedy. Her first marriage, to a press agent named William Ryan, produced 6 children and ended in divorce. Her second marriage nearly killed her. In 1972, she wed Victor Dark, a psychiatrist she had met while seeking treatment for her son's drug addiction. Within 4 years, she accused him of hiring men to murder her. She claimed he had demanded she participate in sexual acts with other men while he watched. The alleged hitman was her own chauffeur. Mary Lee survived. She found a measure of happiness in her third marriage to Broadway producer Marty Richards. Together they founded a production company that brought Sweeney Todd to the stage, but the damage was done. Years of trauma, substance abuse, and family warfare had taken their toll. She would not live to see the trial's conclusion play out in the courts. Mary Lee died on May 3, 1990, at 63 years old. The will contest itself ended not with a verdict, but with a settlement. In the final hours before the jury would have deliberated, the lawyers reached a deal. Beja kept $340 million. The 6 children split approximately $42 million, roughly $6 million each. The charities Seward had mentioned in his will received their bequests. Everyone walked away richer than most people could imagine. And yet, the children had wanted recognition more than money. They already had millions from family trusts. What they sought was acknowledgement, proof that their father had loved them, evidence that the final will was not his true intention. They never got it. The settlement provided cash but no answers. No jury declared Seward incompetent. No judge ruled that Basia had manipulated him. The questions remained open, the wounds unhealed. Basia converted Jasna Polana into a country club. She moved to Europe. By 2007, Forbes ranked her among the 150 richest people in America. She died in Monaco in 2013, having outlived both her husband and most of her stepchildren's animosity. The Johnson family had exposed itself completely. They had aired their abuse, their addictions, their betrayals in open court. They had spent $24 million on lawyers to fight over money none of them needed. And in the end, the only winners were the attorneys. Chapter 5. 7 Capsules, 7 Deaths. Wednesday, September 29, 1982 was a school day, but 12-year-old Mary Kellerman woke up with a runny nose and a sore throat. Her parents told her to stay home, rest, and take some Tylenol. Her father heard her go into the bathroom. He heard the door close. Then he heard something drop. He called out. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. When he opened the door, his daughter lay unconscious on the floor in her pajamas. Mary Kellerman was dead by 7 in the morning. That same day, less than 10 miles away in Arlington Heights, a 27-year-old postal worker named Adam Janus came home feeling unwell. He took 2 extra-strength Tylenol capsules and collapsed. Paramedics ruled it a massive heart attack. His family rushed to the house to grieve. Overcome by the shock, his younger brother Stanley and Stanley's wife Teresa reached for the open bottle on the kitchen counter. Within hours, they were dead too. Stanley and Teresa Janus had been married just 3 months earlier. Their caskets would be carried into the same church where they had exchanged vows. Over the next 2 days, 3 more people in the Chicago suburbs died after taking Tylenol. Mary McFarland, a 31-year-old telephone company employee, collapsed at work. Mary Reiner, 27, had given birth to her 4th child just a week earlier. Paula Prince, a 35-year-old flight attendant, was found dead in her apartment, an open bottle on her bathroom counter. 7 people, 7 capsules, 7 deaths in 3 days. Investigators discovered that someone had taken bottles from store shelves across the Chicago area, opened the gelatin capsules, replaced the pain reliever with potassium cyanide, and returned the bottles to be purchased by unsuspecting customers. The contaminated bottles came from different manufacturing lots, from factories in Pennsylvania and Texas. The tampering had occurred not at Johnson & Johnson plants, but somewhere in the retail chain. The killer had no way of knowing who would buy those bottles, no way of knowing whether the victims would be children or parents, young or old. Tylenol was the best-selling pain reliever in America, controlling 35% of the over-the-counter market. Within days, that share collapsed to 7%. Industry analysts declared the brand dead. James Burke had been chief executive since 1976. When the crisis hit, he did not turn to his lawyers or his accountants. He turned to the credo hanging on the wall of company headquarters. The document his predecessor had written 4 decades earlier spelled out the company's priorities in precise order. Customers first, stockholders last, Within hours of confirming the connection between the deaths and Tylenol, Johnson & Johnson issued warnings through every available channel. They bought national advertising space. They alerted television networks. They set up 2 toll-free hotlines, one for consumers and one for medical professionals. Burke himself appeared on 60 Minutes and The Phil Donahue Show, speaking directly to the American public. Against the advice of the FBI and the Food and Drug Administration, who suggested a limited regional recall, Burke ordered every bottle of Tylenol pulled from every store shelf in America. 31 million bottles, $100 million, gone. The company had been the victim of a crime. The tampering had occurred outside their control. A regional recall would have been legally defensible and financially rational. But in a crisis, the public does not care about legal liability or manufacturing protocols. They care about whether you will protect them. 2 months later, Tylenol returned to store shelves in packaging no one had ever seen before. Triple sealed. A glued box that showed if it had been opened. A plastic band around the bottle's neck. A foil seal under the cap. The Food and Drug Administration soon mandated tamper-evident packaging for all over-the-counter medicines. An innovation born from tragedy became the industry standard. Every sealed bottle you have ever purchased owes its design to those 7 deaths in Chicago. Within a year, Tylenol had recovered its market share. Burke went on to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Fortune magazine named him one of the 10 greatest chief executives in history. The killer was never found. A man named James Lewis was convicted of extortion after sending a letter demanding $1 million to stop the killings. He served 10 years, but was never charged with murder. The case remains officially unsolved. The credo had been tested. The company had chosen principle over profit. Johnson & Johnson had proven that its stated values were not decoration, but doctrine. That history would make what came next all the more difficult to explain. Chapter 6. The Cursed Heirs. In 1994, Woody Johnson co-authored a book called Managing Your Child's Diabetes. His daughter Casey had been diagnosed with the disease at age 8. Together with his wife Nancy, he became one of America's most prominent advocates for juvenile diabetes research, raising millions of dollars and lobbying Congress to fund new treatments. 16 years later, Casey Johnson died because she stopped taking her insulin. The great-great-granddaughter of Robert Wood Johnson I was found in her Los Angeles home on January 4, 2010. She had been dead for several days. The maid who discovered her reported that Casey was ice cold. Her hands had turned blue. The coroner ruled it diabetic ketoacidosis, a condition that occurs when diabetes goes untreated. She was 30 years old. Casey had grown up in the rarefied air of Manhattan's Upper East Side. She attended the Chapin School alongside Paris and Nikki Hilton. She could have been famous. Paris invited her to co-star on The Simple Life. Casey turned it down, later calling that decision the stupidest mistake of her life. Instead, she became tabloid fodder. The New York Post dubbed her the baby oil heiress. Gossip columns chronicled her relationships, her parties, her public feuds. In 2006, she accused her own aunt of stealing her boyfriend. In 2007, she adopted a girl from Kazakhstan. She named the child Ava Monroe, after her idol Marilyn Monroe. Casey struggled with substance abuse and what her mother described as borderline personality disorder. In 2005, her family attempted an intervention. It failed. According to those close to the situation, Woody essentially stopped speaking to her. Her electricity was shut off. Her pool turned green with algae. Her Porsche was repossessed. In November 2009, she was arrested for allegedly burglarizing a friend's apartment, stealing jewelry and clothing worth $22,000. 1 month later, she announced her engagement to Tila Tequila, an internet celebrity, via YouTube video. Tequila flashed a ring she claimed was 17 carats. By Christmas, Casey's mother had taken custody of Ava. Casey flew to New York to try to get her back. She returned to Los Angeles empty-handed. Her last message appeared on Twitter at 1 a.m. on December 29th. Sweet dreams, everyone. No one heard from her again. When investigators examined her estate, they found she had died with approximately $75,000 to her name. No will. The heir to one of America's great fortunes had nothing left. Woody Johnson learned of her death the day after his New York Jets clinched a playoff spot for the first time in 3 years. The coach opened his press conference with condolences. The owner issued a statement asking for privacy. In 1975, Woody's brother Keith had died of a cocaine overdose in Fort Lauderdale. He was 27. Weeks later, his brother Billy was killed in a motorcycle accident in Los Angeles. He was 23. Both shares of the family trust, suddenly vacant, were divided among the surviving siblings. Woody and his brother Christopher became richer with each death. Their father, Robert Wood Johnson III, had been fired as president of Johnson & Johnson by his own father in 1965. The general had rejected Bobby since childhood, reportedly denigrating him as worthless. Bobby died of cancer in 1970, at 50 years old, just 2 years after the man who had dismissed him. The company stock split and split again. Woody never worked for Johnson & Johnson beyond a single summer. He didn't need to. By the time he bought the New York Jets in 2000 for $635 million, the family fortune had made him a billionaire without effort. In 2017, President Donald Trump appointed Woody Johnson as United States Ambassador to the United Kingdom. He presented his credentials to Queen Elizabeth II. He resided at Winfield House, the historic ambassador's residence in London. His brother Christopher ran the Jets in his absence. When he returned in 2021, Woody Johnson was worth over $4 billion. He had a second wife, 2 young sons, and a football team that had not won a championship under his ownership. What he did not have was his firstborn child. The credo had guided the company through the Tylenol crisis, but it offered no guidance for the particular tragedy of wealth without purpose, inheritance without responsibility. And the company the Johnson brothers built was about to face something the credo could not contain. Chapter 7. From Baby Powder to Billions in Lawsuits. The bottle looks the same as it always did. White plastic, soft curves, the familiar silhouette that has sat on bathroom shelves for more than a century. Johnson's baby powder. The powder was made from talc, a soft mineral mined from the earth. And in those same mines, often in the same geological formations, lay something else. Asbestos. As early as 1957, tests on talc from Johnson & Johnson's Italian supplier found contamination. The reports described fibers that were tremolite, a type of asbestos. The company kept mining, kept selling, kept quiet. In 1971, the Food and Drug Administration began an inquiry into asbestos in cosmetic talc. Johnson & Johnson assured regulators that its baby powder was safe. What the company did not mention was that between 1972 and 1975, at least 3 tests by 3 different laboratories had found asbestos in its talc. One test reported levels described as rather high. The FDA never learned about those results. Instead, a 1976 internal memo shows the company lobbying regulators, arguing that up to 1% asbestos contamination should be considered acceptable. When that effort failed, they promoted industry self-regulation. Pediatricians had begun warning parents about the dangers of infants inhaling talc. Sales to mothers declined, but adults kept buying. By the mid-1970s, more than 60% of baby powder sales came from adults using it on themselves. In 1982, a Harvard researcher published findings showing that women who used talc powder for feminine hygiene had a 92% increased risk of ovarian cancer. More studies followed. By 2006, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified genital talc use as possibly carcinogenic. Internal documents from 1992 outlined a strategy to investigate ethnic opportunities to grow the franchise, specifically targeting African American and Hispanic women. The same memo acknowledged negative publicity from the health community on talc, including cancer linkage. By the mid-2000s, nearly 60% of African American women used baby powder, compared to about 30% of the general population. The company distributed samples through churches and beauty salons in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. It launched a $300,000 radio campaign aimed at curvy Southern women 18 to 49 skewing African American. In 2016, a jury awarded $72 million to the family of a woman who died of ovarian cancer after decades of using Johnson's baby powder. In 2018, 22 women won a $4.69 billion judgment. The award was later reduced to $2.1 billion on appeal. Later that year, Reuters published an investigation revealing what had been hidden for decades. Internal documents showed that executives, scientists, and mine managers knew their talc sometimes tested positive for asbestos. They had known since the 1970s. They had never told the public. In October 2019, the FDA tested a bottle of Johnson's baby powder and found asbestos. The company recalled 33,000 bottles. In May 2020, Johnson & Johnson announced it would stop selling talc-based baby powder in the United States and Canada. In 2023, they discontinued it worldwide. Cornstarch replaced talc. By 2021, the company faced tens of thousands of claims. Rather than settle, Johnson & Johnson created a subsidiary called LTL Management, transferred all its talc liabilities to that shell company, and then had LTL file for bankruptcy. The strategy was called the Texas Two-Step. A federal appeals court dismissed it in 2023. The company tried again with a new subsidiary. Rejected again. In 2024, they created Red River Talc and tried a third time in Texas, offering $8 billion to settle all ovarian cancer claims. In March 2025, that effort failed too. The company now faces more than 67,000 lawsuits. In December 2025, a Baltimore jury awarded $1.5 billion to a single plaintiff, a woman who had used baby powder for more than 40 years and developed mesothelioma. $1 billion of that came as punitive damages. The credo that guided the company through the Tylenol crisis offered a clear hierarchy: customers first, stockholders last. The response to that 1982 tragedy became a model for corporate responsibility. The response to the talc litigation has been different. Fight every case. Deny every allegation. Use bankruptcy law to limit liability. Target marketing at communities already using the product most heavily, even as evidence of risk accumulated. The founders wanted to prevent infection and protect the vulnerable. Their company helped millions. The lawsuits allege it also harmed thousands. The bottle still looks the same. What was inside it, and who knew, will be determined in courtrooms for years to come. Chapter 8. What Remains. 3 brothers built a company to fight infection. They succeeded. Johnson & Johnson became one of the most trusted names in American business. The red script logo, the gentle products, the promise of care. Generations of parents reached for that baby powder without a second thought. The family that built this empire did not fare as well. Robert Wood Johnson II ran the company for a quarter century and wrote a document meant to guide it forever. His brother Seward left behind accusations of abuse, a wife who had been his chambermaid, and children who fought over his money in open court. The next generation inherited billions and buried their own. Drug overdoses, motorcycle accidents, a daughter who died alone in a house with no electricity, her insulin untaken. The money kept growing, the company kept earning, and the family kept fracturing. The founders believed they were doing good. Sterile surgery saved countless lives. When 7 people died from poisoned Tylenol, the company spent $100 million to protect the public. That response became legendary. It proved that a corporation could have a conscience. But conscience requires consistency. The same company that recalled every bottle of Tylenol in America spent decades hiding test results that showed asbestos in its baby powder. The same company that put customers first in 1982 fought to limit its liability for the next 40 years. The credo remained on the wall. The behavior did not always match. Values are not inherited. They are not passed down through stock certificates or trust funds. Each generation must choose whether to honor them or abandon them. Each crisis reveals whether the words mean anything at all. The Johnson family name appears on hospitals and foundations and university buildings across America. It also appears on tens of thousands of lawsuits. The same fortune funds, medical research, and legal defense. This is what remains. A company worth hundreds of billions. A family scattered by tragedy and wealth. A set of principles sometimes followed, sometimes forgotten. And a question that every corporation, every family, every person must answer. What do you do when doing the right thing costs more than you want to pay? The Johnson brothers answered that question in 1886 when they bet everything on a new idea. James Burke answered it in 1982 when he ordered the recall. The executives who saw those asbestos tests answered it differently. The lawsuits will continue. The verdicts will accumulate. New generations will inherit fortunes they did nothing to earn. And somewhere in a bathroom cabinet, a bottle still sits. Different formula now. Same name. Whether that promise was kept is for the courts to decide. Whether it should have been kept was never really a question.